चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामी इति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for joining today for this last session on growing through grief. So till now, we have discussed in the first session understanding grief, how it is a wound to our emotional body, to our mind, and its reality and gravity has to be acknowledged. It can't be just wished away, either as material attachment or simply as brain pathology. And I talked there about Arjuna's grief after the death of Abhimanyu and how Krishna did not minimize it. Then yesterday's in last week's session I talked about, so first is we have to understand grief, then we talk about processing grief. So grief is not just one emotion, there can be many different emotions in grief. So I talked about one emotion which can be especially disempowering and devastating is guilt. And in that connection I talked about two key stories. One instance where somebody feels guilty when they are not, that is Yudhishthir after the death of Abhimanyu. And second is when somebody was guilty, that is Dhritarashtra after the death of the Kauravas, especially Duryodhana. And then in that connection talked about how to understand what has actually happened, whether action was right or wrong. We look at the intent, content and consequence. Then we look at the concept of destiny, how before doing a thing we act as if it's the results are in our hands. So but after something has happened, then we accept that whatever has happened is destiny. And in this way, if we move forward in our lives, then we can be both responsible to do whatever is in our power, at the same time be detached about letting go of the things that are not in our control. So if somebody has departed, rather than beating ourselves up with guilt, we can find out the way we can move ahead and help others to move ahead. So today we'll come to the part about growing beyond grief as a third part. But before we do that, I would like to share, would any of you like to share any reflections, anything from the previous sessions that stayed with you, anything that struck you during the week, any points that you would like to share?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu Dandavas.
Dandavat, Harivarshu, yes.
Prabhu, I can't say I have any reflection to share, but I'm only wondering how to help my cousin's son who is going through intense grief for the last 4 years. His mother was a very active personality, but she had a blood clot in the brain, and then she became unconscious, and then she recovered from the unconscious state, but she can't recognize anyone, and it's 4 years gone. But that is her son, continues to blame his father and his sister for not facilitating proper treatment. And this boy is a highly qualified MBA in US, and he left everything and he's in Chinnajiya Swamiji Ashram. crying and lamenting. So I'm not sure how do I help him grow by hearing to your lectures. That's what I'm not clear about it still.
Okay. So generally, when somebody is feeling, is blaming or having any kind of emotion reaction like that, we need to go deeper at what exactly is the cause of that emotion. Is it is it's anger, it's blaming, but when we blame, all of us have many things going wrong in our life, but what exactly is the nature of the wound? See, for some of us, especially if a child or a small baby is crying and the baby doesn't know what to, another is not yet at a level where he can communicate, speak, then it becomes very difficult for others to know what exactly is wrong. And without knowing what is wrong, it is very difficult to fix it. So somehow, with respect to physical pain, there are certain expressions which come, and then we can diagnose it. We may not be able to actually, baby is crying continuously, then we go to a doctor and the doctor is to find out, okay, this could be the problem, this could be the problem, and then some physical parameters for diagnosis help. But with respect to mm, with emotional pain, it is very difficult, because below whatever is being said, there is some other cause. It's like the tip of the iceberg. So we need to find what is it that is actually the the cause of that blaming. Sometimes somebody has had multiple losses. So if it's not so much just hearing some classes, hearing I mean, this classes are meant to provide resources, and one part of the resources is actually it's stimulating one's own, we could say, intelligence, creativity, resourcefulness to address the issue. So last time I talked about guilt. So today I'll talk about, we won't be able to talk about all the emotions that are possible, but in general, what happens is, as I said in this first session, that grief basically is an emotion where there are no means um, to deal with it. It is only meaning we have to find. It is, in the first session I had talked about this. So now the problem is, if somebody finds a negative or a destructive meaning. So the meaning of this is that, people around me don't care, people around me, they are responsible. We can find meaning, and some meaning which we find may be destructive. That say, for example, in some parts of the world there is great poverty, say in the Middle East. But now some people find the meaning this poverty is caused by all the other Western countries or other countries which are oppressing us, and therefore we have the right to destroy all of them. So now, is that the right meaning? Is that something constructive? So we human beings have to take the responsibility to find a meaning that is constructive, not a meaning that is destructive. So, so that's where some support system is vital. A support system helps us process situations in a way that have to doesn't have to be damaging for us. It doesn't have to be destructive. So now when a person has found a particular kind of meaning in a particular situation, that means they have placed that situation in a particular frame. So okay, somebody didn't take care, but is it that everybody who gets a particular disease, it is because of negligence? No, disease is a part of life. So one of the ways, this is a part of another seminar, I'm just searching for that PowerPoint to uh, Finding meaning in suffering. So each of us finds meaning in a particular way in situations. So we need to be able to find meaning in a way that is constructive. And sometimes some people are just not ready for that. So at such times, we can't be of much help. Let me show an example over here to explain what I mean by the frame. Philosophy is actually meant to change the framing in which we find meaning. Say, for example, now this is I am feeling cold. Hmm. So actually, let me go one slide behind this. So we all have a frame. This frame in which we are looking at things. We don't just see things in isolation. We place them in a particular frame. Okay, why did this happen? And then what can I do about it? So for example, somebody say, I'm feeling so cold. Now this is an event. Now this simple event can be placed in many different frames of reference. What do we mean by frames of reference here? Say for example, I am feeling cold. This is circle here. Now this can be placed. Okay, one way of putting it is my clothes are not warm enough. Actually, my clothes are not warm enough is one frame of reference. The next frame of reference is, okay, why am I feeling cold? If my clothes are not warm enough, then the solution is I have to get better clothes to wear. If the windows just don't shut properly, then maybe I have to, for this night I have to go to some basement or somewhere and stay in somewhere else and then try to get the windows fixed as possible, quickly as possible. If it's winter, that's the problem. Then what do I do about winter? Then all that I can do is, mm, then okay, maybe I have to tolerate, I have to get warm clothes. If I say this part of the world is very cold, so now what does that mean? That means that, okay, do I immigrate to another part of the world, or do I need to get used to it? If I say, okay, it's because of climate change, the weather is changing so terribly, that's why we have disrupted ecology. So what can I do? I can try to live more eco-friendly. Okay, so each frame of reference brings its own solution. Now you could go beyond that and say distress is part of material existence. Yeah, now depending on the situation, we have to put the event in the right frame of reference. By right, what do I mean over here? So like same thing, the clothes are not warm enough, put on a sweater. If the windows don't shut properly, fix the windows. If it's a winter or cold country, it's tolerate. If it's climate change, make more eco-friendly. So what happens is meaning isn't intrinsic to the event. So the physical level is where events occur. The mental level is where meaning is constructed. And the spiritual level is where we as conscious beings exist. So if somebody has constructed a destructive meaning, so going back to the previous example now, yeah, if if I'm feeling cold and instead of getting some warm clothes, instead of shutting the windows, I say, oh, distress is part of material existence. Well, that is a valid philosophical point, but that is not the frame in which I should put this situation in. If there is something which I can do about it, if I can get warm clothes, if I get a comforter, then to say, oh, distress is part of material existence, no, that is not a constructive frame of reference. So I'm not using the word right or wrong frames of reference, but a constructive frame of reference. That means constructive means that which helps us to move ahead in the least damaging or the most effective way. So now, if it's winter, and then sometimes the weather goes bad and people just constantly complain about it. It's so cold, it's so cold, it's so cold. Yeah, it's cold, it's winter, grow up. So then when something can't be changed, at that time, what do we do? Instead of harping on it, accept it. Do what we can to deal with it and move on. So the frame of reference in which one has to put it in, we have to ensure that it is put in a constructive frame of reference. So Parikshit Maharaj, when he suddenly faced the prospect of death because of a minor indiscretion, he could have said, This is so unfair. And he could have decided that I will hit back at the Brahmanas. He could have hit back at Shringi. You think you're upstart boy, you think you're so powerful, you can curse the emperor of the world. Just see as the emperor of the world what I can do. Or he could have escalated. This Brahmana boy is not just alone responsible. He is reflective of the rot that has come in the Brahmana dynasty, and therefore I'll destroy the whole Brahmana dynasty. Well, that would not have been at all a healthy response. So what he did was he chose a constructive response. That okay, yes, ultimately this world is a place from which we have to become detached, and this is an opportunity for me to disentangle myself from this world and absorb myself in Krishna. But that same Parikshit Maharaj, when he heard that Kali has penetrated in his kingdom and Kali is tormenting citizens, and when he said, "Oh, the cow and bull being attacked," he didn't think, "Oh, this is Kali Yuga. This is what is going to happen. What can I do?" No, he said, "As long as I am the king and I have a responsibility, I have to counter it." So he uses the Kshatriya resources. It's my duty to counter it. So the point is that at different times in our lives, we have to place events in different frames of reference. And then which frame of reference should we put it in? It is that frame of reference which helps us to act most constructively, or at least prevents destructive action. So this is the ability which we human beings have. Going back to this point again. So I said this over here. So the spiritual level where we exist, the mental level where meaning is constructed. Now what happens is that whenever an event occurs, how we construct meaning without meaning to. That means we don't even think that I am constructing a particular meaning. Now an event occurs and then our mind gravitate towards our default frames of reference and the meaning that comes from them. So for example, if somebody is very insecure, if they have low self-esteem, if they always feel very inferior, and then they go to some get together or some party and they greet someone and that person just walks away. Now maybe that person had got some very bad news and they are in a daze and they didn't even notice that you greeted them. But then what happens is that person already has low self-esteem. They start thinking, nobody cares for me. Everybody treats me like a doormat. Nobody ever respects me. So what happened is the mind went towards the default source of meaning. So this is where intelligence comes into the picture. Either our intelligence or someone else's intelligence. Whichever intelligence it is, uh, that intelligence has to evaluate, okay, what is the meaning that this person has constructed? And how can that meaning be changed? So that is actually the responsibility of us as human beings, to use our intelligence to construct the most constructive meaning. So meaning is not intrinsic to an event. Meaning is what is constructed by our minds. So sometimes we construct destructive meanings. So if somebody, now is that grieving? Yes, it is grieving. But it's, I mentioned in the first session how somebody has a fracture. So for some time after the fracture, you have to put the hand in the sling, and then at that time we have to keep the hand stationary. But after some time, we have to start moving the hand. If somebody starts thinking that, oh, last time I got fractured, therefore let me never move out of my room itself, let me never do anything, because I might get into danger, I might get injured. Well, that's not a healthy meaning to construct at all. So we go through different phases, and after one phase ends, the next phase has to begin. Otherwise we stay stuck in the past. So yes, sometimes for grieving, one may withdraw from the world, one may go into a shell, and that's understandable for some time. So we can only pray that that if someone has constructed a negative or even a destructive, at least not destructive, at least disempowering meaning out of an event, then Krishna gives them intelligence from within, or Krishna sends them someone in whom they will be willing to listen to. So that's how this can be dealt with. So when we talk about guilt, what did we do? Yudhishthira had constructed the meaning that, oh, I am responsible for Abhimanyu's death. And he was shown, no, You're not responsible. Dhritarashtra also thought that, oh, I am the cause of Duryodhana's death. Okay, but he was told it's destiny. Therefore, move on, move ahead now. So the idea is we have to be able to find meaning which helps us to move on with our life, which helps us to move ahead in a constructive way. And that meaning, that task of constructing meaning is up to each one of us. We can take support from others, and there are different kinds of supports we may have, which I'll be discussing in today's session. So what support a particular person needs at a particular time, that may vary from person to person. And whatever support they need to be provided that support. That's actually, to some extent, you could say, the responsibility of others to provide that support. So broadly, sorry, yeah, broadly we can have is okay. Are you able to see the physical shelters? Okay, let me see it over here. Yeah. So this is going to come a little later in the session, but I'll mention it now and we'll come back to this again. So see, there are various kinds of supports that a person might need at that time to to process that grief and to move ahead. So sometimes it's physical change or physical support. That means, so if the inner environment is gloomy, guilty, dark, then change of outer environment sometimes helps in changing our inner environment. Some people just want to go and be alone for some time. I'll be alone and I'll process this. I want to go close to nature. I want to go here. I want to go there. So that is sometimes helpful. Now, that is not the complete solution, but different people heal in different ways. So in general, we all have faced not just difficulties but also crisis in our lives. And if we look back, different people have different ways to deal with crisis. Some people get angry and they may just go to a gym and do a workout. Some people go for a run. Some people, I've seen some people just start vigorously cleaning their houses. Some people may need to vent out their energy. I know one, and I talk about journaling quite a bit. I know a lot of friends who just journal vigorously. There's one Prabhupada disciple, a senior leader in our movement. He told me that he's got one cupboard full of books. And he said, they're all my journals that I have written. And I've written in my will that they should be burned with me when I die. I asked, why is that? So he said that because I use my journaling to process my anger. So a lot of people who have hurt me, I have written in the journal. I have processed my anger over there. So there's a lot of anger and hurt in those journals. If others read, I needed to do that to get that anger out of my system. But if others read it, they may feel hurt. So I don't want that. So I processed it that way. So some people process through physical means. Some people need emotional support. So some people just want to be alone. You leave me alone, I'll deal with this. But some people actually, if they're left alone, they feel deserted. At that time, they need emotional support. So it's important to have supportive friends and well-wishers. So they make us feel loud, valued, and heard. So that's why in various traditions, there are some kind of memorial services where people talk about the deceased, the person who has passed away. And those memories offer some healing sense of solidarity, some solace they provide. So each one has to find out what they need. Is it a person needs emotional support? And then emotional support, yes, I lost someone very important for me, but that doesn't mean I'm completely isolated, I'm completely deserted, I'm abandoned. No, there are others. Then there is intellectual support. Some people just need to make sense of things. Now, at one level, everybody needs to make sense of things, but we all may make sense of things in different ways. So for some people, they just have to get out of physical environment. This is the place where I lived with this person, and that person is gone, and still world is going on, life is going on. How can it be? Now, my world is collapsed over here. How can the rest of the world go on? So when somebody like that physical location is tormenting them, then they need to get out of the physical location. For some people, the physical location doesn't matter. They have to process things in their head. Okay, this is what has happened. Okay, this is how to make sense of it. So philosophies can be very important there. And then ultimately, we all need intellectual support. Sorry, ultimately we need spiritual support. And I'll come to this part again at the end, turning towards something divine as the ultimate shelter to prayer and other bhakti activities. So the spiritual shelter is the ultimate and it's the most important. At the same time, not everybody may be able to process their grief immediately through spiritual shelter. Somebody is hurting, just tell them, let's do some kirtan, let's chant, let's hear some katha. This what? For some people, so the point here is, if somebody in the past has found shelter in that thing, they have found shelter in japa, they have found shelter in kirtan, then they may find shelter here also. But the point is not to do a particular activity, the point is to find relief, to find strength, to find shelter. So different people may need to do different things to find shelter. And when they find shelter in that way, so I talk about two things. First is, we construct meaning in a particular, we all construct meaning in different ways. And once the meaning is constructed, then, okay, that means, okay, this was the phase where this is what I did to withdraw, to rest my arm. I have to reactivate my arm. So how do I reactivate my arm? I have to start acting, start maybe gingerly, lift a little weight, move the arms a little bit. So we all have to start that gradually. So that would be my broad understanding, unless somebody talks specifically and understands what the person is thinking and helps them to see things in a different light. I know one of my relatives, close relatives, his wife passed away relatively, and she passed away because of cancer, and she was relatively very young, in the 30s, and he was reasonably well to do, but he felt that if only he had more money, he could have taken her for treatment outside the country and she could have been saved. But somehow that didn't happen. And since after that, he just got into a feverish pitch. I have to earn money, more money, more money. And it was not because of greed. Sometimes we just give simplistic explanations for problems. Somebody who's just mad about earning money, is it always greed? Well, it may not be greed. It may be insecurity, because the world can give us so many problems. There can be so many things going wrong that we may feel, how much is enough for security? Well, at the material level, you can never know what danger is going to come. And ultimately, when death is going to come, nothing is going to be enough. So he kept earning, kept earning, kept earning. He became very wealthy. But then, about 10, 11 years later, he was not really responsible. Money was not responsible. It was a hereditary disease that his wife had, and then his daughter got the same disease, and he was shattered. And somehow that the disease was detected in such an advanced phase that they said the doctor said it's impossible. He says, no, I've got so much money. What did I earn all this money for? And he said, no, I'm ready to do anything. The doctor says, no, it doesn't matter. This is such an advanced stage, we can do nothing about it. And then that was the time he just was completely disoriented. Say, I worked hard to earn money, and what is the use of money? So then, unfortunately, his daughter also passed away. But that's when he started thinking that money is not the problem. I had all the money, but what could I have done? So now he could have again constructed the meaning, and he could have said that, oh, no, if only I had more money, we would have had regular cancer tests. They used to have cancer tests once a year, like a regular health checkup you do. But maybe we should have done cancer tests once a month. Well, now that way, if you're going to see how long you can go, and every day you can do a cancer test to check if something is there in the body. But that is not the way to live. So fortunately, he didn't do that, and that's when he became a little more receptive. And now he's a very serious spiritualist. He's still exploring, but he's read the Bhagavad Gita, he's read various scriptures, definitely become spiritual. He's not yet found his path, but he's convinced that about the soul and about God and about moving forward in his life. So what happens is that if somebody has constructed a particular meaning and then they're just not ready to change it, then they will have to go on till that meaning is disrupted. This is what I thought was the problem, and this is what I thought was the solution. Well, this solution didn't work. That means this was not the problem at all. The problem itself was something else. So we misdiagnosed it. So we hope and pray that somebody who has constructed a destructive meaning or constructed at least a negative meaning, they are they they are helped either by others, by their own intelligence, or by the events of life to construct a better meaning, healthier meaning. Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Prabhu, so much.
Thank you.
Just one, is there any spiritual counseling system available in India where the boy can reach out to them or the parents can reach out to such an institution? Because in Teenagers Swamiji Ashram, apparently he is not receiving the required emotional, spiritual strength or mentoring, which enables him to come out of the situation.
Mm. I don't know immediately, but I can inquire, and maybe we can talk after the. We can acknowledge at WhatsApp or something after the session.
Okay.
I'll check. There's no. I don't know any devotees who are specifically trained in counseling, but in general, if a disinterested third party talks, they might be more open than somebody whom who is a direct relative at that time and might not be interested in talking. So I think that will have to be specifically discussed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Prabhu, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
when the grief occurs to anyone, I mean, even if he knows all this philosophy, the situation is so difficult at that time when someone is grieving. So we know that there are means and and there are meanings to it. But however, because he knows that the situation is absolutely irreversible, so how the person will be able to think rationally during that time? Because and getting some help at that point in time becomes absolutely difficult, because anybody comes closer to him, he says, just go away, let me just be with my grief, I just want to cry at this point in time. So he becomes so difficult to understand anything during that time. So how one can get help? So these philosophical understanding will be able to, I mean, will help person if he is in a rational way of thinking, or he is able to think rationally. Otherwise, how will it help a person who is actually in the grief? He will be able to understand it, whether how he is going to process it.
That's why I understand your point. That's why I talked about various ways: physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. So yes, not everybody will be rational at that time. Not everybody will be able to process it through rational means at that time. So sometimes some people need their space. Some people, they need their space, and they may cry for some time. And crying is not necessarily a negative thing.
Yeah.
That is sometimes the tears are what are required the for the wounded heart to heal. So one has to be patient, and it's every person's healing journey can be very different.
Mm.
And it's the lot of factors which come in. One of the factors is that overall what kind of nature or resilience the person has, because life will wound all of us sometime or the other,
Yeah.
and
Correct.
there has to be some level of resilience which has to be developed, and everybody has developed that to some extent. Nobody can, sometimes some people say that I'm a war survivor, or I'm abuse survivor, or I'm this survivor. Actually, in this there are of course people who have gone through immense sufferings, and some sufferings can be far more debilitating than others. But in one sense, in this world, everyone is a survivor. Just the world is such a challenging place that everyone who has everyone has had their share of difficulties, sometimes devastating difficulties, and they have survived. So whatever survival skills a person has acquired to the cope, now how useful they are, how much they can avail of it. So that's the first thing that matters. And then second is the people around them. It's not just emotional support. Sometimes physical support can be offered, but um, the most important thing which I have found in dealing with grief is I talk with many devotees, and who is able to come out and who is not able to come out. The most important factor I've seen is a sense of responsibility.
Hmm.
That means that, see, meaning can be found in different ways, but the key characteristic of any constructive meaning is that it involves assuming a certain sense of responsibility. I don't know whether I told this incident about at LA airport when this girl and boy were left alone by their father. Did I tell this last time?
No.
I don't think so. So this was what happened was at LA airport is one of the most busiest, noisiest uh, airports. So I was sitting waiting for. I was in transit, and then opposite to me, by one boy and a girl, and their father was sitting. So this girl was maybe 6 or something, and the boy was 3.5, 3 to 4, something like that. And that boy, sorry, that father, he said, "I'll just go and buy some water or something." He talked with them briefly, and he said, "I'm going." And she girl nodded. And then the father went away, and after that, some kind of alarm came over there. Maybe it was like fire alarm or something like that. Suddenly the whole airport became a little chaotic. Everybody started moving, running. And then this boy, 3.5 year old boy, started crying. And he started crying. And now the sister, she's also a baby, she's also a kid, a small kid, not even a teenager. But she obviously she wouldn't be worried, but she was comforting the boy. Everything will all right. Daddy will be coming back. She's calming him, calming him. And I was thinking at that time, if this girl had been alone, she would have been like the boy crying. But just because she had her brother to take care of, and she took that responsibility. This is my younger brother. I have to take care of him.
Yeah.
So not only did she try to calm her brother, but she stayed calm by that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in a few minutes, the father came back, and the boy and girl ran and hugged the father. And he said, they just, everything was fine. But the point is that, if a person overall, during the course of their life, has learned to take some responsibility or the other,
Hmm.
then that is one of the best ways to get out of grief. If a person has lived in a very comfortable, almost entitled kind of way,
Hmm.
then it is, when I feel entitled to something and that is taken away from me, then it's very difficult. How do you deal with that? So because that person is, their meaning comes from, always from what has been provided to them, and suddenly somebody's providing something that's gone. So how do we deal with it? So when, I think I mentioned this in the first session briefly, that we all have had our share of griefs. So when I was in my 10th standard, my mother passed away because of blood cancer. So it was very sudden. In the 10th, I did very well in my 10th exam. In India, 10th exams are very big. So my name came in the newspaper. The district collector came to our house to congratulate me. It was a big occasion. And on that very occasion, day, when that happened, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And within a month, she passed away. So it was devastating. But then at that time, my father was working in another city. We were staying in Nasik, and my father was working in Mumbai. And he even couldn't get a transfer back. So I was completely shaken at that time. But then I had a younger brother. And there's almost like a difference of 11, 12 years. My parents chose not to have another child because they wanted to focus on, I have polio. So they wanted to treat my polio as much as it could. They wanted to focus attention on that completely. But when my younger brother was born, so when I had gone to see my mother for the first time after he had delivered the baby, she said, now you are the big brother. It is your responsibility to take care of him. So at that time, When I was shaken, then I saw my younger brother. He was probably 5 at that time. I was 15 and he was 4 and I was 15. So he just couldn't. He had at that age he didn't even have an idea of what death was. So seeing how shaken he was,
Mhm.
I felt that I have to take care. My mother was taking care of this family. I can't do anything for her now, but at least I can carry on her legacy. This is her child. This is my brother. And then that, of course, at the same time, I started also reading more philosophical books, and it took a few years before I came to the Bhagavad Gita. But again, that sense of responsibility, it helped me. So that's why uh, sometimes it's not so much about what has happened at a particular time in a person's life. It is more whether a person has actually inculcated that sense of responsibility. That's why the most important gift that any caregivers can give to their subordinates is not just to provide things, but it is to inculcate that sense of responsibility. The Prabhupada, even in the first few years, right, in 66, 67, 68, the devotees were barely knew basic philosophy. Prabhupada said that this is our spiritual master's mission. This is the mission of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Krishna. We have to spread it all over the world. And not I have to spread it, we have to spread it. So every Prabhupada disciple, those who met Prabhupada, heard from Prabhupada, they had that sense of responsibility. So creating that sense of responsibility, now of course it can't be entirely created. Ultimately, the individual also has to choose it. So, so generally, constructive meaning is found in responsibility. And how do we know meaning is destructive? When the meaning is destructive, when it simply takes away, it makes us want to give up responsibility, to quit all responsibilities. Now, by responsibility, there can be various levels of responsibility. Sometimes we may say just give up all material responsibilities and take up Krishna consciousness. Well, I don't see material responsibility and spiritual responsibility as contradictory. It's progressive. Even if somebody say renounces the world and becomes a renounced devotee or a renounced spiritualist, they will not grow just by renouncing things. They have to take up spiritual responsibilities after they renounce. Otherwise, their renunciation will just be escapism from the world. So the ethos of taking responsibility is vital for everyone in life. And to the extent that has been inculcated, then no matter how great a grief a person goes through, how great a loss, they will find some way to deal with it. They'll find some meaning and move on. In fact, many of the most inspiring stories we may hear about people around us is how people found some meaning and they took some responsibility thereafter. So, I think this is a point which I was going to speak later in. That pain that is not transformed gets transmitted. Pain is also like an infectious disease. Like if somebody gets COVID, they come in contact with somebody else, they transmit it, and it goes on, going on. So, but we humans have the capacity to transform pain. So, what does transforming pain means? It is done through this pain. There is meaning, and then there is responsibility. So, amid pain, if we find a meaning that helps us to take up some responsibility, that is what is the way of transforming pain. And then when the pain is transformed, it is no longer transmitted. So say somebody might grow up in a very abusive family, and that person, if they don't find some meaning, they don't, then they will grow up, if they have a family, they will become perpetrators of the abuse. That's how you have traditions of abuse going on sometimes in some dynasties. On the other hand, somebody says, this is what I went through, and maybe my parents were hurting, they had some issues, but I will never become a parent like that. I want to become grown up in a different way. So whatever be it, when they find some constructive meaning and they take up the responsibility. So that pain, for it to be transformed, there are two steps. First is we find a constructive meaning, and constructive meaning means that a meaning that helps us take some tangible responsibility to do something. So for some of us, it could be that in our pain, we find solace in spiritual knowledge. And then sharing spiritual knowledge becomes our sense of our, that's what we take responsibility for. You will see even in bhakti, even in spiritual life for that matter, some devotees may have the ultimate knowledge, they may have the, not the ultimate knowledge, ultimate practices they have, but still all that they do is, we complain, gossip, backbite. Not all, most of the what they do is that. So why is that? There could be many reasons, but one reason is that they haven't taken any sense of responsibility. And if you don't take responsibility, then what happens is, then we have to do something. So quite often what we do is we do something destructive, and nobody will say that they are irresponsible. Some people think, at least I know one devotee, I mean, you could say this devotee is probably the biggest gossip spreader on the internet. So I mean, I know him personally, whatever, but he actually thinks he's doing a service. That wherever anything has gone wrong, he says this is in our movement. So everybody should know that things have gone wrong. Really? Does everybody need to know everything that has gone wrong everywhere? Do we even know that we may live in a particular city? Do we know everything that has gone wrong in that city itself? No, we don't. And do we need to know? As if something would immediately threaten us, we need to know. But otherwise, there is enough negativity in the world. But he's actually taken responsibility for that.
Hmm.
Now, that is not a very healthy way of taking responsibility. So, so, so when I say responsibility, also you can take somebody says that uh, I'll take responsibility to destroy this whole thing. Why? Because this is what caused this problem. Well, the responsibility can also be taken in a destructive way. But the point is that something which helps us to be a part of the solution, to do something to fix the problem. So does it address the point, True?
Yes, Prabhu. Yeah, very well. Thank you so much.
So thank you for those questions. I was going to discuss these points a little later, but we came beforehand. So that's nice. We came to them before. So let's look at, in the first session, I talked about how Arjuna was shattered by the death of Abhimanyu. And then how did Krishna, how did Krishna help Arjuna to find meaning by which he could take up some responsibility. So the first thing that Krishna told, okay, we discussed this one. Just 1 minute. So he told him, what's going on? Okay, sorry. Yeah. So the first thing that Krishna told Arjuna is that he gave some framework for seeing his suffering. He said, Krishna told Arjuna that actually suffering befalls everyone in this world. He talked about the mind often gets us alone and then it gets us. Oh, I am suffering. No one is suffering like me. Yes, in the specifics, nobody may be suffering the way we are suffering. But in principle, everybody is suffering. So distress befalls everyone in the world, the wise and the unwise, the good and the bad, the wealthy and the poor, the beautiful and the ugly. Distress befalls everyone. That is the nature of the world. So, so Mahabharata says over here that no one can escape the law of death. There are different laws, and different people are clever. Some people will be clever enough to escape some laws. So, but no one can escape the law of death. And he says, okay, then somebody's died. What can I do? He offers him reassurance that although there's distress for you, Abhimanyu has attained a an elevated destination, an exalted destination, celebrated destination. So he has gone beyond this world of temptation and tribulation. His plight is not regrettable. It is we who are still trapped in this world. It is our plight that is regrettable. So he just almost flips the story. He just turns around the perspective completely. Then further he says is that, yeah, he says that the Lord's inscrutable will is surely for the good of everyone. Now, again, there's a very important point over here. He's not saying, there's a big difference between saying that everything, Lord's will is everything that happens is good. That's not what is being said over here. everything that happens is for the good of everyone, for good. Bad things happen in life, and it's dehumanizing to expect somebody who has just suffered some terrible loss to say that everything happens is good. There's a big difference between everything happens is for good and everything happens is good. For good means some good may emerge out of it, but right now it's bad, right now it's horrible. In India, in many places, people put this Gita Sar, essence of the Gita. There's no references given to specific Gita verses in that Gita Sar, but on the statements over there is whatever has happened is good, whatever is happening is good, whatever will happen is good. Now, there is no verse in the Gita. I've read the Gita dozens of times, recited it hundreds of times. I've never found any verse which comes anywhere close to this. Because the Gita is more important. The Gita is not about what happens. The Gita is what about we is. It's about what we do. Pruchhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha. Dharma is about the right course of action. What am I to do? What is the right thing for me to do? That is the onus of the Gita. So now, why is it significantly different that when people are suffering, that they are suffering, and we cannot minimize their suffering or tell them this is not, this is good. Well, somebody might just have lost an arm, somebody might just lost a loved one, somebody just lost their business, somebody's very important relationship was broken down. It's for good. Yes, some good might come out of it, but to say it is good, well, no, bad things do happen in life. When Draupadi was being disrobed, or Draupadi was disrobed, nobody goes and tells her that whatever happened is good. No, it is a horrible thing that happened to her. So then, if we understand that things can happen for good, then wisdom in action means that, okay, now the problem has come. So this again, going back to the point of taking responsibility. The unwise act in ways that increase the distress of those around them. They are in distress, no doubt, but they act in ways that increase the distress of those around them. In contrast, the wise act in ways that decrease the distress of those around them. So that is the difference. Wisdom doesn't necessarily protect us from suffering. Of course, wisdom can protect us from much suffering. If somebody doesn't know how to use electricity and they fiddle with a live wire, and somebody who's intelligent enough to know what electricity does and they don't fiddle with it so carelessly, they will decrease the amount of suffering that they're going to have. But no matter how wise one is, some amount of suffering will come on everyone. But what do you do when the suffering comes? The wise act in ways that they're not just caught in their own suffering. Why am I suffering so much? Why am I so suffering so much? Yes, that is there. But actually, the more we get out of ourselves, the more we think of someone, something bigger than ourselves, the more our own suffering, its magnitude decreases. We can cope with it better. And then now it says that the will of the Lord is inscrutable, but he gives him the confidence. If we do his will, we will understand this. This means that whatever the God's will is for the good of everyone. We will understand this in due course. In due course. So that is what actually Krishna also tells as Arjuna also says that yes, I will do your will. Karishye vachanam tava. That's the conclusion of the Gita is also there. So through everything that is happening, ultimately Krishna is calling us closer to him, and we move towards him by taking small steps, maybe baby steps. And then at this point, what did Arjuna do? Arjuna constructed a meaning that brought him to a call to action. Now, Arjuna was not simply out there to take revenge. It was justice he was seeking. That his son had been brutally killed by the Kauravas. And before he got into a position where he was killed so brutally by the six Kaurava warriors, it was Jayadratha's perfidy, it was Jayadratha's opportunism by which he cut Abhimanyu off from all the other Pandava warriors. And that's how Abhimanyu was trapped. So he decided that Jayadratha will have to pay the price for having caused Abhimanyu's death. And then the next day, Arjuna fought like never before. And on that 14th day, the Kaurava army suffered their worst damage, the worst loss they had suffered. Arjuna penetrated and devastated all their ranks, and finally he did neutralize Jayadratha also. So that was a call to action. So the point is not taking revenge. The point here is taking responsibility. That's the key thing. So now that brings us to, this was the anecdote, that the incident from scripture. So what does it begin with? That there are, if we consider destiny, last time we discussed was the circle of things that are in our control, and there are many things outside our control. So the key thing is death is unchangeable. That if it has happened, it has already happened. But how we respond to death is changeable. And there's a wound in the heart that happens when we are when we are when we face a loss. So the hole in the heart may remain, but the heart grows bigger. The heart grows bigger. What does it mean? Our consciousness can expand. And our consciousness expands, then each of us can deal with the situations better. Expansion of consciousness means we may have to live with pain, but we don't have to live in pain. With pain means, yes, this injury is there, this wound has happened, and it's not healing right away, but I don't have to be consumed by it. So at this stage, sometimes we say, somebody is grieving and we say, no, you should move on, this is enough. But sometimes some people can't move on, but they can move with it. What is the difference between moving on and moving with it? That means that, say, somebody had a fracture and then they put the hand in the sling. But unfortunately, after putting the hand in the sling, taking necessary rest also, the hand didn't recover. So now their hand has still not come back to normal. Now they might be taking complete rest for a week or two, but can they just be at rest for the rest of their life? Well, that is not the way life works. So sometimes there's a wound and we have to move on in life with that wound. So sometimes the wound is just a chapter in our life, and the chapter ends and we move on back to normal life. But sometimes that wound leaves scars which may last forever. That sometimes the wound may leave some injuries that may last forever. But just as some people have to move on with physical wounds and vulnerabilities because of that, some people may have to move on with emotional wounds. So what does that mean? Just as sometimes, suppose somebody had some severe injury because of some accident or whatever, and maybe the right hand, they can't carry any heavy weight. Now they have to be aware of that. I can't carry heavy weight. Maybe I'll carry with my left hand, or I have to ask a porter or somebody else to carry it. So like that, for some people, there might be some emotional wounds, and some sites, some situations, some stimuli might trigger some strong image, some strong emotional reaction within them. When this happens, they just become extremely agitated. So if that's happening, then what can they do? Well, they have to be aware. Okay, this triggers me off very strongly. Then I have to be cautious. I cannot expose myself to this too indiscriminately. So that's so the point is, some people may have to move on with the grief, not move on from the grief. The grief is still there, but life can move on. So how do we move on with that grief? How do we expand our consciousness? That will be the last part of the seminar. And see, the defining characteristic of grief is a sense of loss, a sense of emptiness. And then associated with that, there may be many other emotions which may be our way of making sense of the loss. There might be anger, there might be blame, there might be guilt, there might be just nihilism. Nothing matters in life. Everything is meaningless. There can be various other things, pathologies might come up with it. But the defining characteristic of grief is a sense of hollowness, emptiness, loss. And so in that sense, the opposite of grief is gratitude, sense of fullness, a sense of richness, a sense of abundance. So the way to expand our consciousness. So in one sense, there is a certain loss which we can't deny. which we can't deny. But how do we expand our consciousness beyond that loss? That we see, okay, I have suffered this terrible loss over here, but apart from this loss, there are many other things that are right in my life. And looking at those things is one way we expand our consciousness. We don't have to live in pain. So the healing can happen in different ways for different people. How they expand their consciousness, that how can they see beyond? Like grief is like falling down into a ditch. We have to find our ladder to get out. And when we find that ladder, that's when we can get out, and that's when we can move ahead. So another way of understanding this is, yeah, there are many metaphors. I'll take one metaphor. If we get time, we'll come back to the others. Okay. Yeah. So many of you may have seen, or at least we have all heard about birds coming out of shells, baby birds coming out of shells. So now, similarly, we all live in certain shells. And for the baby bird, the shells in which they live, those shells actually protect them. When the baby bird is very small, the shells are not only protectors, but they are vital, indispensable protectors. If the shell breaks prematurely and the baby bird comes out, the baby bird might not even be well formed, and it will not be able to survive, it will die. So the shell that comforts the baby bird up to a particular point eventually starts constraining it. Constraining it means it just starts feeling extremely cramped, and then the shell is cracked. The shell is cracked. The baby bird cracks the shell and breaks it and comes out. And it's a painful process. It has to crack one part of the shell and then crack another part of the shell and then crack another part of the shell. And then she cracks the shell and the shell moves open a little bit and then snaps back again. And then maybe its wings or its legs get trapped inside the shell parts and it pains it. Again, it pushes and slowly it comes out. So for all of us, we have certain shells in which we live. The shell may be the shell of our comfortable family situation. The shell may be the shell of our successful professional situation. The shell may be the shell of our respectable or respectable social position in life. We all have our particular shells in which we live, and sooner or later those shells will break. So now those shells are essential for us to to feel comfortable, to feel safe. If somebody doesn't have a loving family, if somebody doesn't have any kind of financial security or some kind of job, if somebody is in a social place where nobody cares for them, they have no social respectability or acceptability, that's a horrible place to be in. So those shells which you're talking about, they play an important role, and we all need those shells, but they are not all that we need. There's a time when those shells, they protect us, but as we grow, we all as human beings are meant to grow, and as we grow, then we start outgrowing those shells, and those shells they constrain us. Instead of comforting us, they start constraining, they start restricting us, and that's when the shell breaks. Now broadly, the shell can break because of two reasons. When we talk about bird shell, it may break by nature's own process, and for us, we can also do conscious effort to break the shell. So by nature's own process means some situations may change and we may suffer some loss, because of which the shell breaks for us. Or sometimes we ourselves consciously decide that, there has to be something more in life. I want to pursue something higher, and therefore one tries to come out of that shell. They may be comfortable in that shell, but they feel, I don't feel comfortable over here, so I need something more in my life. So either way, it is better that the shell breaks because of our conscious effort, because then we are ready. What is there beyond the shell? But for somebody who is not making the conscious effort, nature suddenly breaks the shell. It's very difficult. What do I do? How do I move ahead? So nature's own process, when it does it, then we need to be prepared, or we need to prepare at that time. Now the hope for us is there are bigger shelters always available each time till we attain the ultimate shelter. Till we attain the ultimate shelter. Now, in the Bhagavatam, there is a story of Prince Dhruva. Now, Dhruva was living in a shell. What is a shell? He was a small 5-year-old boy, and he was living with his mother and his father, and he was living in the royal palace. It was a very comfortable shelter for him. But then suddenly, what happened was that shell broke. He realized that his stepmother practically hated him, and his father was ready to neglect him, deprive him of his own right to sit on his father's lap, just for pandering to his stepmother. So the shelter, the comfort that this is a place where I'm safe, where I'm loved, I'm cared for, that's suddenly broken. And he ran back crying to his mother. And his mother said, I'm sorry, Dhruva. I can't change what has happened. She didn't have enough sway on her husband, and there's nothing I can do. But he says, how dare I be deprived like this? Then she pointed him to a bigger shelter. She told him that you go to Lord Vishnu. And Lord Vishnu can love you more than what millions of mothers like me can. So he found his present shelter inadequate, but he was fortunate that he had a mother who pointed him to a bigger shelter. So in general, when his mother says this thing, that his mother says that Vishnu can love you millions of times more than any mother like me. So the implication over there is, whatever good whoever does for us, it is God who is doing it for us through them. So Dhruva didn't think I'm his child, or this is my child and I'm loving this child. He said, this is ultimately Krishna's child. This is the Lord's child. He's in my care and I am doing what I can. But when there's nothing I can do, then there is a Lord who can help. So when a particular shelter is broken, we may be devastated, I am left shelterless. Or we can see that actually this shelter which I had was also a way in which it was the Lord who was sheltering me. So Dhruva's mother's love was the way Krishna was expressing his love for him at that time. But when her love was inadequate, when that shell broke, there was a bigger shelter available. So continuing that example of mother and child. So if you consider the mother and newborn baby. So what happens is that when the newborn baby is there, the mother offers her breast milk to the baby. And that's one of the most intimate acts of love, of pure love in this world. Now, certainly the mother who loves the baby and offers the milk to the baby out of her love. At the same time, it's not that the mother does anything special to produce milk at that time. Actually, milk is already the same Lord who has arranged for a baby to come from her womb. That Lord has also arranged for milk to come through her breast. So the mother's love for the baby is definitely her love, but it is not only her love. It is God's love coming through her. So rather than thinking, oh, I lost this shelter and I'm shelterless, you can see that in our lives, at different times in our life, we get different shelters. And those shelters, if we see them as the ultimate shelter, then what will happen is if that shelter goes away, you'll feel, what is the point? I'm left shelterless, I'm alone. But if we see that shelter was a manifestation of the ultimate shelter. And if this shelter is gone, there must be some other shelter. There must be some other bigger shelter that is available. And let me seek that shelter. And we will find a shelter. And that's how we will move ahead. So expanding our consciousness, that's the theme which we're talking about. So expanding our consciousness means that our consciousness had found, the size of our consciousness largely depends on the size of our shelter. Whatever is our shelter, that's where our consciousness is largely situated. So we want to expand our consciousness beyond that. So if my consciousness is sheltered primarily in my health or my looks, then if they start deteriorating because of that, people start thinking, what is the use of my life? So it can lead to a lot of problems. So then we have to expand our consciousness. Yes, nobody wants to look ugly or be unhealthy, but that is not the soul, or definitely not, that is not even the biggest shelter that we have. It's one shelter. Sometimes that is there, sometimes not there. But there are other shelters available. So that sense of loss, as I said, grief means a sense of loss or emptiness when it comes, when something is vital is taken away from us. Well, that will be replaced by some bigger shelter. Something else will come. So that appreciating what else is coming in my life, that is the key to go from grieving to healing. Gratitude, that okay, this shelter is lost, that's why I'm grieving. But the gratitude, because there is another bigger shelter. This shell was broken, but there is some other shell that will shelter me. So what is that shell? To appreciate that, now let's look at this point about grateful. We could be fretful, we could be resentful, or we could be grateful. Now, resentment of reality often hurts more than reality. That sometimes somebody might be injured, somebody might be wounded. So they're wounded, that's bad. But if they keep resenting it, why did this happen? Why did this happen? That's what shackles the person, and that's what makes it much worse. So it's being grateful is a way of simply actually stopping our own hurting, because the opposite of grateful be now. Now, when we are grieving, one way a person might grieve is by resenting. Why did this happen? So actually, if you see, our very existence depends on things beyond us. So as it says, if I'm not grateful, I'm a great fool. So we may say, why did God let this happen? Why did God do this to me? Well, actually, it's not God who did this to us. It's karma. It's complicated who did it. But here you see a person, they are shooting someone, but actually the very person they are shooting, that person can just step off this balancing plank, and if that person steps it off, takes one step back, all that the plank is going to get overturned, and this person is going to immediately fall away. So, but unfortunately, this person has not realized that I'm going to blame you, I'll shoot you. So we are that ignorant sometimes, that it is not just about the people around us who are giving us strength to face the problems we have, but also the Lord. Without him, we wouldn't be sustained in our life. And it's vital for us to recognize that this is what is happening. So if I'm not grateful, then I'm a great fool. Because what am I doing if I'm not grateful? I'm actually destroying the very plank that is supporting my existence. And now we say, I have lost something so terrible. It seems cruel to talk about gratitude at such times. Well, yeah, the loss is real, but that doesn't mean that we can't be grateful. See, we can't be grateful for all situations, but we can be grateful in all situations. For all situations means this thing has happened, this is terrible. There is no way I can be grateful for this thing happening. That's understandable. That's a human emotion when there's loss. But even in this situation, there are many things that are right in my life. And I'm grateful for those things that are right in my life. And what are those things? To find those things, each one of us has to look forward, look positively. See, okay, what is right in my life? Some of you may know about this acronym which I talked about earlier. This is ACE. Ace your life with gratitude. Look for the good around the bad. Look for the good that counters the bad, and look for the good that may emerge from the bad. So look for the good around the bad means that in our lives, for each one of us, there are bad things that have happened. But those bad things are not what characterize our life alone. that it depends on us which evidence we highlight. Hmm. I was in America and I was at a college, a university, and there's this boy. He says, "I'm an atheist." Okay, so which God do you not believe in? I asked. What do you mean? I don't believe in any God. Okay, but what is the conception of the God you don't believe in? He said that. I don't believe in a God who sends people to hell just because they don't believe in him. I told him, even I don't believe in such a God. Even I don't believe in such a God. If you see in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna talks about somebody going to hell, that is not because of disbelief in God. It is non-believers aren't sent to hell in the Bhagavad Gita. It is wrongdoers, people who destroy and damage, who hurt others, who kill others. That lust, anger, greed, they will take people to hell. So it's hell is a destination given for those who disrupt law. They're not just because they don't have faith. So it's a significant difference between Abrahamic religions and the Dharmic religions. But the point is, we had some interaction, and then I asked him what happened. How did he become atheist? So he told me his story, and it's a very sad story. He was born in a good family, but his parents were somehow they were very um, hardline Christians, and they were now Christians are a very broad field. There are 55,000 Protestant denominations, and apart from Protestant, there are Catholics. Catholics also have many orders, and there is of course the Russian side of Christianity also, which separated long before the Protestant broke away from Catholicism. So we cannot characterize reduce Christianity to one set of characteristics alone. It's difficult. But anyway, so he was in a group where the pastor taught them that any forms of physical affection, any forms of affection, are a sign of the devil working among us. So his parents, he said, never offered him physical affection. Babies they won't fondle, they won't care for. It's terrible. But anyway, he said, I grew up in a very unloving environment. And then when he was about 10, suddenly both his parents died in an accident, and he became a ward of the state. He just had to go from here to there to there. He said, I had a horrible time. Now what happens is when kids who are in foster care, uh, if they grow up in foster care, there is a certain amount of I'm not saying toughness in a positive sense, just in an objective sense. And if somebody who's grown up in a sheltered environment, it's very difficult for a person to suddenly go and start living. So I told him that you are now he's in a good university. So how did you end up over here? He said, I got lucky. So he said that after going for 2 years to different foster homes, I was adopted by a very good family, and it is they with whom I'm living, and they've arranged for me to be in this. With them, I studied nicely, and now I've come to this university. They arranged for it. So, so he said, he had a lot of resentment with God because, first of all, because of his religion, his parents never showed him any physical affection, and then after that, his parents passed away. So I told him, I empathize since it's tragic all that has happened. But I told him that at what age were you adopted by your foster parents? He says 12. 12. He says, what are the chances of someone at the age of 12 actually getting adopted by parents? So it's foster care is basically for some time you care, and then you may go on to the next, but somebody permanently adopting is a bigger thing. So he said he was adopted by parents. He says, what is the likelihood of a person at the age of 12 child at the age of 12 getting adopted? He says, it's extremely rare. He says, I was very lucky. So I told him, see, when bad things happen to you, you are saying you are blaming God for them. But when something remarkably good happened to you, you're saying that's luck. Either both are luck or both are God. He said, I'll have to think about that. I could clearly see that he was thinking about it. So see, what happens is that in everyone's lives, terrible things have happened, But in everyone's lives, good things have also happened. And when good things happen, we may call them as I got a lucky break. Today was my lucky day, or whatever. We use that word, but it's actually double standards towards God. When bad things happen, why did God do this to me? And when good things happen, now I may say I worked very hard, I did so much effort, I did study all that. That's true. We're not denying that hard work is required for success, but is hard work alone enough? Even with hard work, we need some what people call it lucky breaks. So for all of us, good things have also happened. So it's up to us to decide what we are going to look at. Either we look for the bad thing that has happened in our life and just hold on to it and say, this is terrible. Or, okay, this bad thing happened, but still, there are so many good things that are around. Good things that are around. I met one, I think, where was this? It was Canada. I met one boy who had come for a program. He was a young man now. So I heard his story. It was, I spoke some class and I spoke something about the tsunami that had struck India in the class. So he came and talked with me and he told me his story. He said that he was studying in a school in Sri Lanka and his school was a little bit on like a hill place. He went like a normal day to the school, and when he came back, there was no home, there was no family. He's just a 7-year-old boy. Everything that he knew, even his whole neighborhood was swept away. So still, then he had been adopted by a family in Canada and he was a refugee as he had come there and everything. Now he's well settled in life. So his life can be horrible at times. But so he had just started exploring spirituality, and he says he started making sense. He said that when I heard about karma and destiny, it started making sense to me. That yes, it was my destiny that I lost everything, but it was also my destiny that I came here and I found good things in my life. So in life, it's up to us. Either we look for the bad, that is all the bad things that have happened, or we look for the good around the bad. Nobody is saying that this is not bad. Yes, terrible things do happen and they need to be acknowledged. The wound has to be acknowledged. But is our body filled only with wounds? Naturally, if my one organ of the body, one part of the body is wounded, I have to pay special attention to that. But my remaining body is still functional. So similarly for us, there are many things you're right in life. So one way to expand our consciousness is look for the good around the bad. Now we may say, hey, all this sounds very good, but I still have the problems in my life. How do I deal with them? And that's where the second part comes in. Look for the good that helps us to counter the bad. Okay, there may be 10 good things in my life, but out of those 10 good things, what are the things that I can do right now? Which are the things that can help me to deal with the problem here? See, the problem is having problems is not the problem. I mean, everybody has problems, but having problems which we just can't do anything about, that makes us feel powerless, that makes us feel purposeless, and that is a real problem. So, but if okay, with this resource I can deal with this problem, that sometimes dealing with a problem might also mean just tolerating it. So I may say I lost my mother, I lost my father, I lost my brother, I lost my spouse. Yes, these are all terrible losses, but okay, look for what is right in my life, and then among the things that are right, that particular loss can't be made up for, but for me to deal with it, what is it that what are it that I can use? Okay, these friends are there to help, these relationships are there to help, these resources are there to help. So again, the underlying ethos is we talk about taking responsibility. Okay, I can't just take responsibility, I need some resources. So what are the resources by using which I can take responsibility? So the look for the good that helps us counter the bad. And if we do that, then there is the last part, that look for the good that emerges from the bad. Emerges from the bad means that bad, even when bad things happen, but from it, like one shell is broken, we'll find that we come to a bigger, better place. The bird who breaks through the shell, the bird emerges stronger and then can fly high into the sky. So similarly for all of us, through the bad things, if we grow through that grief, we will come to a higher level of meaning. We will find a deeper level of purpose, and that's how we will grow in our lives. So in life, whatever it is that we may have to suffer, We can't control that. Suffering is just a part of life. But although suffering is a part of life, it doesn't have to be the defining part of life. It doesn't have to be the it doesn't have to be what defines our life. So what happens if we can move in this way, then each of us will discover that, yeah, while the world can hurt us in many ways, greater than the world's power to hurt is God's power to heal. Greater than life's power to hurt. Yes, one shell may be broken, second shell might be broken, but beyond it all, God is there. He is sheltering us through these shells, and He shelters us beyond those shells also. So ultimately, we need that spiritual shelter and various other forms of shelter: the physical shelter, the emotional shelter, the intellectual shelters, or rather supports. They all are meant to help us find that spiritual shelter. And that is the way, once we are all looking for love, support, care. And as long as we look for that in anyone finite, we set ourselves up for grief. Our heart longs for things which no other human heart can satisfy. It is only the divine heart can satisfy that. And we all have to find our way at our pace to connect with the divine heart. But that is where we'll find the ultimate healing. That is where our wounded heart, although the heart is wounded by loss, the fulfillment, the joy, the strength, the security that comes by connecting with the Lord, connecting with the divine, gives us strength by which all other wounds can be tolerated, and then they can be transcended. And that is the ultimate way to grow beyond grief. So I'll summarize. I spoke today about 4 main points. The first point in the question answer, we discussed about how when we are suffering, the event itself, meaning is not intrinsic to the event. It is how we construct meaning. And some of us may construct a destructive meaning. And there's no, we can't focus on the right and wrong meaning, but the most constructive meaning is that which helps us to find a way ahead, that which helps us to take responsibility. So to transform pain instead of transmitting pain, we have to find meaning that enables us to take up some tangible responsibility. So that was and for going through that, for able to find that meaning, there can be different supports. There can be physical support where a person just goes to a different place, gets out of that environment. Emotional support where a person finds support and care and love from others amid that grief and loss. There can be intellectual support where a person immerses themselves in some wisdom, some philosophy, and that's what makes help them make sense. Or there can be spiritual support where one connects with the Lord, with the divine. Then I talked about Arjuna's story and how wisdom meant that act in a way that doesn't increase the grief but decreases the grief. So take responsibility. And Arjuna took responsibility, and that's how he came out of that grief with Krishna's guidance. Then we talked about how sometimes grief may stay on with us, but we can move on, not from the grief, but with the grief. So some injuries may stay forever, but to move on with the grief, our consciousness needs to expand. So for expansion of consciousness, I give 2 points. One was the shell example, that when one shell breaks, there's a bigger shell available for each one of us, if we just seek that bigger shell. So ultimately it is whatever is sheltering us, it is Krishna who is sheltering us through that shelter. The mother who offers shelter to the newborn baby by giving her breast milk, it is Krishna who is providing her the breast milk. So the same Krishna who gave us one shelter, and then when that shelter broke, that Krishna is not going to leave us shelterless. Krishna will give us another shelter. So like that, we move on till we find the ultimate shelter. And to expand our consciousness, we may have to live with pain, but we don't have to live in pain. That means the pain becomes a part of our experience, not our full experience. For expanding our consciousness, what do? In one sense, grief shrinks our consciousness. It makes us filled with a sense of desolation, emptiness, loss. But if you want to feel the opposite, connection, fullness, enrichment, then about the ACE acronym. Look for the good around the bad, look for the good to counter the bad, and look for the good that may emerge from the bad. And in that way, whatever hurts life, whatever life may hurt us in many ways, but God's power to heal is greater than life's power to hurt. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any concluding reflections or questions? Yes, Manimishita Mataji. Okay. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavad Pranam. It was nice. First of all, I want to thank you for your sessions, and I really got good points to apply in my life if anything happens as such in the future, and also like any support if I have to give to any other person like my friends or family members. So I got all these points. Maybe I can just pray for me that I can apply these points. The one thing I also wanted to reflect is you just gave an example. Before that, I wanted to actually give you this my experience with few of my friends, and I came across, and you also came now. You just gave the example that there was an atheist whom you knew, and then I have some friends like who are actually don't believe in God. And the same reason, like I asked them why you don't believe in God, why you don't, they do everything, like, all the ritualistic things, whatever they have to do, they go to temple and all, but they don't have believe in God, no. And same thing, whatever happens good thing, then they will say I'm lucky. And you just mentioned that in the class. So, and the same reason, like, my father passed away when I was 10 years old, when I was 5 years old. And I was in like devastated situation. My mother was alone handling 2 kids. So these things, examples were given to me. And then how should we just tell them, you gave where you used your intellectual support. But for me, like giving an intellectual support, I should have that much knowledge to give them support, So what I know that we have to find the right frame, right time, and right. And also it's a Krishna's mercy, a Krishna's will that I have to explain them. And yeah, so how should you go ahead with like such people? This is one
Yeah.
example I got from your example, but
I would say that it's not like a one size fit all formula. And sometimes some people are just not ready. So we may just have to maintain a courteous relationship and move on. Now we see when Prabhupada was in Scottish church, he criticized the Vedic philosophy. There's this talk of karma and reincarnation, and we suffer for previous lives. Where is the witness? Who knows who has done what? And here, Prabhupada, he was sitting there as a student, and Prabhupada, Lamadeva described that Prabhupada felt that he didn't have the authority at that point. He was a teacher, he was a student, and India was quite a hierarchical society at that time. So you don't contradict your elders. So Prabhupada could have gone into a debate, but he decided not to. But Prabhupada eventually, when got the opportunity, he spoke. So it is he spoke to the whole world, and he shared the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas. So there are times when not speaking may be the best thing we can do. So I would say that wherever a person is, our purpose is to elevate their consciousness. Now, sometimes people are not really ready to elevate their consciousness much. So then, at least let's not be the cause of their consciousness going down. So if we get into too strong argument, we become bitter, and especially if we feel we are not equipped to answer questions properly, That could be just humility sometimes. We are equipped, but we feel humble. But sometimes it could be just, yeah, the kind of aggressiveness with which a person is arguing. I feel, I can't cope with this. I may have arguments, but I can't deal with this kind of aggressiveness or this kind of attitude. Okay, then let them at least not become offensive to devotees by having irrational arguments, which which are distasteful in general. Shouting or yelling or anything like that. Let's behave in reasonable, in cultured way, in a respectful way, and we can, if we are regularly interacting with them, then we can find some way to, okay, this is the person's interest, this is the person's soft spot, this is a person where they're receptive, this is a point where they're receptive. So that's why it requires a certain amount of understanding the person to see where they could be penetrated. So sometimes I turn this around, and again I said this is intellectual, but I'm just telling that there are different approaches. It's not that one approach you use. So I said that a person said, I'm an atheist. And okay, so why? So he says, because so many terrible things happen in the world. And so many bad things happen to good people. So then I asked him, okay, why should bad things not happen to good people? What do you mean? Good things should happen to good people, bad things to bad people. He says, why? Who said that? If there is no God, then there is no reason to expect any kind of correlation between actions and the results of those actions. What do you mean? He says, if the universe is the result of insentient matter moving according to impersonal laws with no organizing principle, then why should, in fact, if within a completely raw materialistic view of life, there is no such thing as good and bad also. All that is good and bad, you could say, what is favorable for survival and what is unfavorable for survival. And then you decide what is favorable for whose survival, because the world is a place of competition. So if A succeeds at the cost of B, something bad happens to B, but that was good for A. So is it good or bad? I mean, whose survival, whose failure is basically, if we go seriously into the idea of materialism, the ideology of materialism, then there is no such thing as good or bad. So why should there be any correlation between actions that are supposedly good leading to reactions that are supposedly bad? So I said that the very reason why we ask why good things happen, why bad things happen to good people, is because such incidents are exceptions. They may happen frequently, but still they are exceptions. We see in the normal course of life, if a student studies diligently, there might be some exams in which they may not get good marks, and it's not always a linear correlation. But there is a reasonable correlation. So if a person is normally, they are very tidy, then wherever they go, they keep their place tidy. And if the place is not tidy, there has to be some explanation. Maybe somebody else came and stayed over there, or maybe they were in a hurry, or maybe there was some storm hit or whatever. So the very baseline expectation that leads to this question, atheism leaves no basis for that. So when you say you got a lucky break, so in one sense, the way to put this is that atheism makes arguments based on a foundation that atheism has no right to. What do I mean atheism has no right to the foundation? That if you talk about good and bad, well, how are you going to even define good and bad? What is good and bad? If I'm just a bunch of atoms and molecules, and you are just a bunch of atoms and molecules, and then these interactions happen, and even if I die, it's just the atom that comprises my body is going to a different form. So why is even my death a bad thing? If I am simply a lump of matter. No, but I'm a living being right now. Yeah, but if the fundamental component of some ingredient of life is simply matter, then in what state matter exists, what difference does it make? It makes a difference to me. But you are nothing but matter. So matter is just changing its form. What difference does it make? So this could be a big argument, big discussion, but I'm just giving an example to illustrate that this point that there are different approaches, and we have to find out which approach. Sometimes some people are atheists not because of some arguments, because they're convinced with atheistic arguments, but just because they found that religious people were so self-righteous and ritualistic and puritanical. And if they meet other religious people who are not like that, just that contact with them will change. We had taken some group of American yogis or yoga students, not yogis, yoga students, to a tour of India to Vrindavan, Rishikesh, and some other places. So so there's a whole group that organizes. So Shaman Prabhu and I, we were the teachers in that. So during the trip, we inspired. We had interaction several times. So we asked them how was the experience. So one of the girls, she's about 20, 25 something, she said that, this is my first experience of guilt-free religion. I said, what do you mean? She said, I grew up in a Catholic family, and Catholics are famous for that guilt. Oh, the original sin, you are guilty. And it's everything that you're told to go to a church because you're guilty, because you're guilty, because you're guilty. So this is my first experience. And nobody so this is a trip that I have come on my own. This trip is not because somebody sent me on a guilt trip. And I feel so happy about it. So we didn't even know when she came for the trip that she was an atheist. She was a yoga practitioner, but she was an atheist. But she was not what you could say a philosophical atheist. She was more like a psychological atheist. What I mean psychological atheist is, it is just not that she had any arguments against the existence of God at a philosophical level. It was that just she had such bad experiences. I don't want to do with something like this. So when she had better experiences, by the time she went back from Vrindavan, she went back to America, she had beads and she started chanting also. Now, how long she chants, we don't know. But the point is that we have to find out the way to reach that person. So I'd say that it needs spending time with them, understanding them, and seeing how, from which side of their heart, there might be some place for Krishna to come in. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Prabhu. I have few questions, but I'll just give others to chance. I might just some other time. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments? Okay, there are some here. Okay, I'm seeing some comments.
I've just put them in the chat.
Okay, how to... Thank you, Annie. Happy to be of service. So how to generally find out any source that connects us with a bigger reality. So it could be wisdom, it could be the holy name, it could be the association. So our consciousness at a particular level. So any channel, any impetus, any stimulus that connects us with the bigger reality. So that can be any channel, but connecting with that channel on a regular basis. So here reading the Bhagavad Gita regularly, hearing talks based on the Bhagavad Gita, chanting the names of Krishna. Krishna is the ultimate reality. He manifests as his holy name. So when we chant his holy names, we are linking with the ultimate reality. So the size of our consciousness depends on the things that we are putting in our consciousness. So if somebody is constantly hearing and watching a cricket, then their consciousness is caught in the idea of cricket. So whatever happens in a cricket field, that completely agitates them, overwhelms them, excites them, makes them miserable, whatever. But what we put into our consciousness, that will determine the size of our consciousness. So Krishna talks about two things, abhyasena ta kaunteya, vairagyena cha gruhyate. So I translate abhyas as feeding and vairagya as fencing. That means we feed our consciousness things that will expand, things about connected with the ultimate reality. And we fence our consciousness, we protect our conscious vairagya from the things which will again shrink the consciousness. So there are many things which can get us caught in small attachments, small trivial issues. There is so much gossip that goes on in the world. So we get caught in it, we hear it, and sometimes it just stays in our mind and keep thinking about it again and again. So feeding things that connect us with the bigger picture, the bigger reality, and fencing our consciousness from the things that will get it entrapped in small things. That is the way we can increase our consciousness. Yes, thank you for that comment about the shelters. Adipurush Prabhu, happy to be of service. Vilas Manjari Mataji, thank you. Yeah, again, I think that's also oh, that was just your comment. Vilas Manjari Mataji. Thank you. Yes. Any other comments?
Prabhu, I just put a question in the chat about the different levels of consciousness. So maybe.
Okay, I'm not able to see. Okay. Yeah. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandmaya. The level of support has to be given to each level depending on a case to case basis and also based on what the person wants. Offer what they ask for, wait, and when they ask for the next level, give it. So now, is this a good way we can move ahead? Yes, definitely. Now, whether the five koshas are the framework we use, that is a framework. So there are many different frameworks we could use for analyzing what level a person is at and what they need at that time. Krishna also talks about it in the 3rd chapter that na buddhi bhedam janayed ajnanam karma sanginam joshayet sarva karmani vidwan yukta samacharana. He says that don't disturb the minds of people even if they're attached and even if they're ignorant. His point is that engage them in a way that they can become elevated from where they are. So it's important to understand their level, definitely, because when we are sharing any spiritual wisdom, we have to be careful that the effect should be to encourage. So for example, a person at this level of consciousness, and then from here maybe they can come to this level of consciousness, but when they're at this level of consciousness and talk about this level of consciousness, then see, there is a practical and there is the ideal. And if the gap between the practical and ideal is too much, and if they don't see any many intermediate steps in between, they'll feel this is impractical for me, or they may even dismiss that as unreal. This is not real for me. So whenever we are sharing any wisdom, it's not just that we create the gap between the practical and the ideal. We also need to bridge the gap. Okay, you are here, from here you can come here. So we have to provide people resources for expanding their consciousness. Otherwise, we just tell them that, okay, what you are having, it doesn't make sense, it is not meaningful, but what next? So yes, so understanding the level of people and then giving them guidance is important. Fully agreed. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so
Hare
much.
Krishna, Chaitanya.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I was really looking for something on these lines because of the situation the world is in, and close family members getting affected, etc. So really appreciate your classes, and there's so much content. I'm going to be re-listening and taking notes again because there was so much.
Thank you. Happy to be of service. Yes, this is when we are going through kind of situation. I call this as applied spirituality. It's not just spirituality, but spirituality is applied to our daily issues. To the extent we have it that way, then it becomes much easier.
To learn from. So just my appreciation.
Sorry, I lost you. Trauma. Sorry, I can't hear you. I think you become muted. Okay.
Sorry, my internet connection is very unstable today.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Yeah, but just, I don't know how much you heard of what I said. I really don't know where it ended.
I heard something of the word trauma.
Right.
say that-
All I was saying was, Prabhu, that the topic was, so much required to be covered because of all the traumatic events that have been happening around, and some personal losses as well. So so I really appreciate your getting into such a lot of detail with the topic and analyzing it so beautifully for all of us, for our benefit. And the other point I was making was that there is so much of content in your lectures that I'll be definitely listening to them at least 2 to 3 times to have it all assimilate. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rohu, and we'll be looking forward to the next topic.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Jai Gaur Premanande. So I thank Shiva Krishna Prabhu and his team for making this seminar, for organizing the seminar, and thank all of you for your participation as well as for your reflections. I pray that Krishna's wisdom can help us all and help us help others in facing life's challenges and moving closer to Him. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Krishna Buddha.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you very much.